Joining us now, David Sanger, CNN political and national security analyst and defense attorney Misty Marris, who's with us as well. David, as we watch this, it's fascinating to me just how much interest there is, not just here in the United States, but outside the country as well. What is hinging on this trial, not just for Donald Trump, but frankly, what it says about where the country is?
Well, Erica, there's some risk for the U.S. along the way here, but I think there's also some opportunity as well. You're absolutely right. There has been fascination abroad. As you know, I was living in Germany for a few months at the beginning of the year, and you would see in the subways headlines about developments in the Trump trials, in a way that we would never have here about a foreign trial. On the one hand, I think there are many abroad who don't understand why the first trial is not about the core questions of whether or not the president tried to illegally seize power through manipulating the election. And of course, explaining the way these come to, the calendar works on these is not easy. But on the other hand, I think there is a respect for the United States that the rule of law actually does reach as well to the president and former president. And it will be interesting to see whether that plays out over time and whether it could actually strengthen the American image.
Picking up on that point, I also want to bring in Misty Marris here. Misty, as we look at this, to David's point, there have been questions both outside and inside the country about why this is the first case to go to trial, when some other cases are seen as more consequential in many ways. Just remind us why we're seeing this play out today in this courtroom behind me, and why we are not yet seeing, for example, the classified documents case or questions about January 6th.
Absolutely. So there's multiple cases going on. This is a state level prosecution in New York. This one was on track and actually moved forward without a lot of delay. However, the other cases, for instance, the federal case involving January 6th, there is a very, very important Supreme Court decision that needs to come out before that, and it relates to presidential immunity. Arguments on that are going to be happening next month, and then a decision isn't likely to come until into the summer. And so with the presidential immunity question hanging in the balance, that case in Washington about January 6th cannot move forward. The classified documents case in Florida, again, it's in a little bit of a procedural oblivion. There are all sorts of challenges that need to be worked out by the federal court before that case can move forward. And of course, the state level prosecution relating to January 6th in Georgia was railroaded by all of the hearings relating to Fani Willis and potential impropriety in selecting a special prosecutor, Nathan Wade. So that's also in the procedural oblivion. So the short answer is the procedural status of those other cases still have legal issues to iron out before they go into the courtroom. This case, the judge had it and on a relatively expedited track. And Donald Trump actually tried to get this case delayed, but wasn't successful in doing so. And that's why we see this case moving forward as the first one, which was a surprise to many, but it's the one that's going to hit the courtrooms first and pave the way for the rest.
This is such a historic case because it is the first criminal trial for a former president. David, people are also looking at this because depending on what the outcome is, there could be the presumptive Republican nominee, a man who could very well retake the White House. I mean, we are far out from the election in many ways, but not, and it's a dead heat right now. People are also looking at this because depending on the outcome, what could that mean if there was a second Trump presidency?
Well, it would be a pretty remarkable scene. I mean, we could be, if he was convicted here, could be in the position where he couldn't vote for himself, but of course he could still legally run for president. This is a state trial, so he could not pardon himself if he won the presidencies. In the federal trials, there's a lot of speculation that he would try, or more likely that he would derail a prosecution once he was in office. In any case, almost all prosecutions would be delayed until he was out of office. So it tells you that the stakes for former President Trump in running are pretty high, because he's not just running for office, he's running for his freedom here, whether or not, or potential freedom, whether or not he would stand trial. And then, of course, there will be the constitutional questions that will have to be adjudicated if, once the president comes in, could he interfere in his own prosecution? Now, we're not there yet, but it is very possible that this state case may be the only case that goes to trial before the election.
It is such an important point to make. And Misty, as we look at this in terms of those other cases, as you were walking us through some of those, there is, of course, a hearing with the Supreme Court coming up on Thursday to address Donald Trump's claim of presidential immunity. That obviously would not apply in this case. This is separate. He was not in office at the time. But looking at that is incredibly consequential. And that playing out, just yet another reminder of how much is at stake here legally for Donald Trump, all happening at once and all happening in the same week.
Absolutely. So this New York case would not be impacted by that presidential immunity argument, as you said, Erica, but that presidential immunity decision by the Supreme Court, that has impact way beyond Donald Trump. That's going to answer questions about the level of protection that a president has while they're in office and what would constitute something that's actionable from a criminal perspective if they're serving as the president. So that hearing is incredibly consequential for Donald Trump, not only relating to the cases that it applies to, which would be the January 6th federal case being prosecuted in Washington, but also repercussions for forever relating to that question and that issue of presidential immunity. So that is a very, very key hearing. And the ultimate decision made by the Supreme Court obviously impacts Donald Trump, but has a historical impact as well.
Missy, David, really appreciate it. Thank you both.